I lead the collaboration and social enterprise management practice for Cask LLC. We are actually a company headquartered right here in San Diego. And I first of all wanted to thank our host, and specifically James Heller, for allowing us an opportunity to come in and present our message today. And also wanted to recognize our marketing director, Jennifer Guba, who helps us with all of our shows and events. She does a great job, so I wanted to say thank you and recognize those folks. So today we're going to talk about really what some of the collaboration and culture interplays are in today's enterprises. I labeled them as inseparable twins. And we'll get into some detail around that. We'll talk about what those trends are, who the players are, what some of the concerns are, and really how you balance the mix between security as well as collaboration. Okay, perfect. Then we'll talk a little bit about tools and patterns. We'll talk about what some of the industry standards are and what some of the thought leaders are doing as in respect to the way that they analyze tools. We'll talk a little bit about some of the Cask proprietary tools and patterns and the way we analyze them. And then I'll leave you with some closing thoughts. So let's go ahead and get started. So Cask is, as I mentioned, a company that's headquartered here in San Diego. We were founded in 2006. Principals Mark Larson and Liz Gazelle. We're a privately held company. And we actually employ 76 people across the United States and also have presence in Europe. And we really, in a nutshell, what we do is we help organizations make, measure, and manage their investments in technology. So collaboration, if you really look at it and break it down in its simplest form, it's one of those buzzwords in the marketplace today. It's kind of fuzzy, it's soft. We know that we should be working together, but what does it really mean, right? So if you think back to, when you were a kid at camp, and I like the illustration of kind of pulling on the same rope, because there's, a lot of lessons from that I think that we can put into, our adult lives in the corporate environment. It really just means two or more people or organizations working together to achieve a goal. And it's a recursive process. And it's really distinguished from cooperative ventures by a deep commitment. That's a joint commitment by all involved. And I think of it as being the difference between a management mindset and an ownership mindset. So an ownership mindset has a stake in the game versus a management mindset that's more of a cooperative. So let's talk a little bit about those inseparable twins that I mentioned. And it's not actually these guys, they're not twins, but the twins of organizational culture and collaboration. So the guys that you see here are social scientists. They've done a lot of research around how organizations work. Kim Cameron and Robert Quinn, they actually came up with a validated research method to examine exactly how organizations, what are the characteristics that comprise organizational culture, how do people think about them, and they put their instrument in front of employees for over 10,000 companies worldwide. So they had a really nice sample to pull from. They looked at things like dominant characteristics, organizational leadership, management of employees, organizational glue, strategic emphasis, and criteria of success. So I would encourage you to check out that book. It's as far as organizational culture change management goes, it's a pretty nice read. So their methodology, they came up with this concept of the competing values framework. And so what you see in the competing values framework is really 4 quadrants of 4 organizational culture styles that differ very strongly. So you have an internal focus and integration versus an external focus and differentiation. And then you have stability and control versus flexibility and discretion. So in their studies, they found that most organizations have a very dominant culture style. I don't think that's really surprising, to us when we look at that. But also keep in mind that there's rarely only one dominant culture style. Just as we're complex as individuals, organizations are also complex, so there can be up to 2 or 3 mixes of these styles. So to the left in the graph, the organization is internally focused, and what's important for us, or those individuals in that style, is how do they want to work, and then versus to the right, the organization is externally focused on the outside world around the clients in the marketplace. At the top of the graph, the organization desires flexibility and discretion, and then at the bottom, the organization wants the opposite values of stability and control. So what we have here in their first archetype as far as cultures is something called the clan culture. So clan culture is really interesting. It's this really pleasant place to work, right? It's kind of where we all would like to work. It has a leader type that acts as a facilitator, a mentor, a team builder. I mean, everybody wants a boss like this, right? And the value drivers, are things like communication and commitment and development. So they're very, very, very deep, almost personal type of value drivers. And they care about things like developing their people and participation to produce effectiveness. Their strategies revolve around team building and open communication. So the adhocracy, I like this play on words, but the leader type in the adhocracy organization is your typical visionary. You'll see examples of this type of organization in Silicon Valley and high-tech software companies, startups, and venture capital firms. Usually tend to fall into the adhocracy culture. So what's important to them and their theories of what matters as far as effectiveness is things like innovation and vision, and then really just producing new things, right? I mean, these people like to create the toys that that drive the future and that we as consumers buy. And surprise and delight is a big thing for them, right? I mean, Apple has that nailed. So the market culture, I mean, this is one that I think that we all have worked in an organization that's more like this. I know that I have, coming from the telecom space. It's a very results-oriented organization, and the main concern is getting the job done at all costs. People are highly competitive. They tend to be very goal-oriented. The leaders are hard drivers, producers, and competitors. And they're very tough and demanding. I mean, deadlines are deadlines. Reputation and success are very common concerns in this environment, and the long-term focus is on competitive actions and achievement of measurable goals and targets. It's, as I mentioned, it's not really the funnest place to work, but it's very purpose-built. So the hierarchy culture, this last archetype is pretty interesting, and as I mentioned just a bit ago, rarely will you see, just as organizations are complex, you'll see a mixture of these patterns, right? So the clan culture is actually one that we live and embody at Cask, so some of those values, but also as process and technology consultants, we also fall under very much of the hierarchy culture, in the sense that we have to, do error detection and measurement and analysis, and systematic problem solving are very, big parts of our culture and organization. So I really like this graphic. It's from the Burton Group. It's a bit dated, but I liked it from really understanding at each layer of where the collaboration, the content, productivity, the real-time communications, the email, and things like rich search kind of stack from a developing to a sunsetting model. And I think what's an interesting piece of this is, you see even just 3 years ago, right? So unified communications in the developing space, that's obviously now moved well into the mainstream. And also, integrating more broadly with traditional document management platforms, like the social business tools, which were in the developing space, but now moving into the mainstream. So they have a lot of open APIs and are really attaching to some of the market leaders like SharePoint. So what I would like to stress here is, and what I see going forward, what we really see as an organization going forward as you kind of look at this stack is, I would expect the shift of social computing and social business to continue to go to the right and mature as a key part of the kind of organizational dynamics into the mainstream that challenges those more conventional corporate cultures that we just looked at, the more authoritarian, my way or the highway type of stuff. They're not open, they're not collaborative, they're not sharing. But what I would caution you when you're thinking about this in your organization is governance still is king, right? So governance, we think about it traditionally in the IT world with things like SharePoint, right? And making sure that we have good controls, policies, and procedures. The social space is a lot murkier than that, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't need or require governance, but it's a very real problem with balancing the needs of the business and security concerns with things like openness and sharing. So this is a more current breakout that was done by the research group, and if you notice, actually, Jive and Lithium are listed in Gartner's Magic Quadrant, and then Microsoft and IBM are listed as challengers. So those are really the market leaders in their respective spaces. Cisco's WebEx Social, as well as the Yammer platform, which are listed in the niche segment here, I would expect to move up. Yammer actually was acquired by Microsoft in June or July, so they've got some pretty deep pockets to continue development, and they're very aggressive from a programming standpoint. So they are attaching to Salesforce, for example, to SharePoint, for example. And so really, what the big deal is about that is it's allowing those users to drive that content into their communities, even if they don't have a license for some of those upstream content platforms that they're getting and pulling the information from. So the benefits of that are really obvious. I mean, it can save in licensing costs, but as far as a productivity driver and the real relevant value is getting the information in front of the right people at the right time to increase speed and time to market and access to expertise and information. So these are some of the shifting sands that I mentioned. In summation, like I said, I mean, Yammer's really now under the Microsoft umbrella. There's been pretty heavy M&A activity in this space, and so when I see as an analyst and as a consultant, when I see a lot of M&A activity, that's a red flag. Something's going on, right? So what's going on in this space? Why is Big Blue and Microsoft and all these people jockeying for position? The reality of it is there was a study released in July of this year by McKinsey Global Institute that talks about the next 3, 4, 5 year kind of roadmap for social business and collaboration platforms, and the productivity gains that organizations are going to be expected to retire or realize as integrating these social business platforms into their enterprise is a $900 billion to $1.3 trillion opportunity. Okay, so those aren't numbers that I can comprehend, but that's really what's going on here. So what you see is these guys getting in line, they're opening up, they're becoming more collaborative, they're attaching, becoming very sticky from a social standpoint so that they're able to understand the marketplace and that their productivity drivers increase so that they can capture some of that and recognize some of that revenue. So this is another breakout of kind of the social tools, the content tools, some of the real-time tools, and the community tools. So it's a little bit, it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around the space. Just in the social space alone, when we started doing research and looking at what the social marketplace looked like, there's a lot of those innovators out there, right, that have that innovative culture, and it seems like another one, really spins up every week. If they've got some good software, then there's, a big willingness in the venture capital community to invest in those guys, because some of them are hitting home runs, and it is an emerging space. And at the end of the day, I mean, they figure the downside is probably getting acquired, right? So it's really overwhelming, but, these slides will be available to anyone that would like to look at it or talk with us in more detail around it. This is the nexus of forces. Actually, at the Yammer conference last week in San Francisco, I had the privilege of hearing the Gartner VP deliver this vision. And if you think about the old IT model, right, for those of you that have been in IT for any number of years, it used to be that IT was this dusty room that was a little bit isolated from the users, and the users didn't have any idea how the technology worked. They just knew if their stuff was on, if it was operational, and then they had unrealistic expectations, and it was just sort of an adversarial relationship, right? So in this new kind of nexus of forces, the things that are going on in the marketplace, it's a very user-centric environment today, right? And there's been a lot of, kind of a lot of reasons that drove that, but things like, we'll look at cloud, for example, right? Cloud offerings and services really sprung up and gained momentum in the last decade because of the mounting pressures of scale, economy, and flexibility. If you look at the mobile marketplace, right? So things like the whole consumerization model, which demands, things like 24/7 access, real-time communications, those consumer-style GUIs, that's a reality today. And enterprises have largely capitulated and given into those kind of user demands because if you look at what was going on 5 years ago when everybody started really getting on smart devices, that was when we were starting to go into a bit of an economic downturn, right? So from an organizational standpoint, it just made sense that to allow people to bring those devices into the enterprise. And that was just really accelerated by the downturn. Information overload is, and metadata is, it's a mushroom cloud that's really just continuing to bloom and get bigger. The explosion has put tremendous pressure on things like storage capacities and really tested the limits and abilities of business intelligence platforms to kind of filter out that noise and find, true signals and make just massive terabytes of information turn into data and intelligence. So that's a real challenge. And so, in the social world, what the biggest thing about social is leveraging the power of the crowd. And, it's really entering the mainstream business community as a productivity driver. Some people, and especially there's a lot of executives that are still have an arm's length approach at understanding what the value of social business is as deployed in the enterprise. Most of them, quite frankly, are still considering it somewhat of a project or kind of a pet project or a toy. And the reality of it is that social is unique in the sense that it's escaped the same type of ROI TCO inspection that all other technology has been sold on in the marketplace for the last 20, 25 years, right? So social is just kind of, in a lot of people's minds, still this kind of kumbaya, we're going down the road of collaboration together, but I still don't have, I know it's great for my people to be working together, but I can't point to the economic and financial impacts it's having to my business. So as leader of this practice, I've actually attended probably half a dozen conferences and been in proximity to a lot of director level folks, C-level folks that have collaboration in their title. FedEx, Tyco Corporation, the Mayo Clinic. I mean, these are the types of organizations that have social business platforms deployed in their environment. And I've asked the same question of probably 150 to 200 individuals, and it's a simple one. What business value and financial value are you getting out of your social business platform? So they want to talk to me about things like user adoption and customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, and they're very soft, fuzzy, kind of unquantifiable measurements, right? And so, I haven't gotten an answer to that question. So that really got us thinking along the lines of, what some of the needs are in the marketplace. So the next generation architecture, this is a pretty simplistic representation, but just suffice it to say that the information architecture is really going to have to display these characteristics of modularity, distributability, being findable and discoverable, replaceable and shareable. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the security thing, because that's another really hot topic with all the black hat activity that has made the news and been splashed a lot of headlines and gotten a lot of notoriety lately. So how can you lock down information and protect your enterprise, but then also still be open, right? It's just not congruent with each other. So when they did, this, when FedEx and Ketchum did this study earlier this year, they found that 27% of the companies this was a real concern for them, right? And it centered around things like, blurring personal and business lines, right? I think that we've never lived in a time where personal brand is just as important, right, in the enterprise as almost the company brand in some instances. So there's a lot of contention and confusion in that area. Who owns the content? That's a very big deal, right? So, in certain spaces when you're creating things like copyrighted or patented material, it's pretty baked out. But outside of that, quite honestly, it's kind of the Wild West out there. And you have a lot of people that are employees that are creating content that's really should be the property of the company, but there's not a strong governance model or lines of definition to identify issues like that. Of course, legal and compliance issues continue to be a concern. SOX, HIPAA, PCI, things along those lines. And then just addressing misinformation that pops up in social networks is also a continuing problem. So I mentioned earlier, SharePoint governance, that's a pretty well understood space, but it's not still not a well-disciplined space. Just because you have a SharePoint doesn't mean that it's administered correctly, doesn't mean that documents and informations are findable and searchable and architected in the way that they should be. And so if we know that a known technology like that has these problems, and we all know that it does, think about all of the kind of gotchas that organizations are dealing with in the social space when it comes to governance. So being very prescriptive and having a strong governance policy around your social business platform, if you're looking at making an investment one, is extremely important. So the collaboration imperative, I like to say that spend and hope is no longer an option. I think, for me, it's really just a sanity check, the whole keep doing the same thing over and over. And what we've seen, over the last 20 years from a technology standpoint is, hey, I've got a budget, there's some new bells and whistles out there, some new features and benefits, a new release. I know I didn't use half the ones in the last release, but I want that thing. It's like a small shiny object, small shiny object type of thing, right? So we really believe that, in our world, technology is a tool, not a solution. Things get sold as a solution, but actually all they are is tools. So you're never going to, be able to change a tire with a hammer, right? Good luck with that. But adoption and utilization, unfortunately, are missing and are lagging in most organizations. Every organization is different. There are the different cultures, and understanding what your organizational culture is, and what your maturity level is, and what your capabilities is really the first step to creating a strong and solid collaboration strategy. So the top findings of the Ketchum study was that social tools are increasingly being leveraged inside organizations. And when you see things like a Jive platform or a Yammer platform, they've got 70% penetration into the Fortune 500. The reality of it is, in speaking to some of those individuals, as I mentioned earlier, they're not understanding what value they're getting out of the tool, and they have mixed adoption within their enterprise. So the Mayo Clinic, for example, it's a 50,000 plus user organization. There are about 13,000 users into their Yammer adoption, and they just don't have a way to measure that value, right, and what the value of increased adoption is. Ownership of social media is expanding beyond marketing to business leaders, employees, and consumers. And businesses are being forced to become more adaptive and taking a strategic approach and utilizing social tools to listen and respond to their audiences, right? So again, it's sort of that user-centric model that we saw in the Nexus of Forces. So no longer can, organizations and IT leaders say, hey, here's the new technology. It's got these, features that I promise you're going to love, and we're going to roll this out. That's just not the world that we live in anymore. So we have to be able to be reactive and adaptive. We have to have strong listening vehicles and systems to gain intelligence, and social is a great way to do some of those things. So this graph is a screenshot of the McKinsey Global Institute study that I mentioned, and it really looks at the way that knowledge workers spend their time. I think that first one around reading and answering email, that's one that's aged me quite a bit over the years. And, it's not, everybody hates working email, right? But 28% of the average work week in this study, people were reading and answering email. It's just, it's unfathomable, but that's the reality. The other big thing is, searching and gathering information, finding a document, finding the right version, making sure that, who has the latest version is always a big challenge. Communicating and collaborating internally, and then role-specific tasks. And so what you see on the right is what percentage from a low estimation to a high estimation from a productivity percentage improvement standpoint that these organizations could capitalize on or realize, so capture some of that $900 billion to $1.3 trillion value in productivity savings that I mentioned earlier. And so this is really how it works. So I told you that a big part of what we're trying to do in this space is help organizations like the Mayo Clinic, like FedEx, that have their foot in the water with some of these tools, but are trying to understand what the economic value is, right? So what we've done at CASC is built a calculator and a tool. It's modeled from a 10,000 scenario Monte Carlo simulation. And so what you see really along the y-axis here is the probability of achieving the savings that you were promised, right, when you adopted the technology as a value-added time applied to productivity. And then along the x-axis, we wanted to be smart about the way that we built this. So we realized that just because you give people time doesn't mean that they're going to use it wisely and that they're going to be involved in productive measures, business-focused measures for that time. So if you yielded back 10% time from, say, reading and responding to email, right, that big heavy hitter in the initial, that first bullet in the MGI study, so you save 2 hours per person in your organization for adopting a technology like this that really reduces your email footprint. But are those people going to spend the 2 hours heads down in their computer or their project or other initiative? Or are they going to be focused on other things? So what we wanted to do is just ascribe what we think is a break-even probability. So what you see in that graph on the left is what we found when we ran these 10,000 scenarios is really at the 15% level. The value proposition for this technology is so compelling and it's so strong quite honestly, we had to scale it down to make it palatable and credible. We did it at a scale of one user, which I'm sorry I don't have a screenshot of that, but one user in the enterprise driving a realistic and average median credibility or return from the tool saves the average organization about $14,000 a year. So even in a 200-person organization, the numbers become very astronomical. They don't have, even though they're based on academic research in the marketplace, people have a healthy level of skepticism, like, I'm not going to get that value, I'm not going to get that much value in my organization from adopting the technology. So what we had to make it more realistic and said, even if people only use 15% of all this time that you're giving them, 2 hours, 5 hours a week, whatever it is, if you get 15%, you're breaking even. So that really becomes a management issue. These are our building blocks. These are our collaboration patterns that are really reusable solutions that can be applied again and again in different contexts. And they support the business processes are really the target for the efficiency and risk reduction. And again, technology acts as that enabler through the application of technology features specific to the chosen collaboration pattern. The collaboration pattern, again, is a reusable workflow. It's designed to implement details of the who, what, why, and how dimensions. And then it requires a specific set of technology features so that it can be implemented. These are our core patterns, and I would sum these up and think of them in this way. Very broadly, you can think of these as creation, publication, curation, and consumption. I apologize. Let's look at that top one, our storyboard, for maybe a little bit of clarity. So what you see here is a very simple workflow. It's just understanding the problem and searching for expertise and help, whether that expertise and help is in the form of a knowledge management repository or human expertise. And then discussing the problem, generating the alternatives, and repeating, determining the course of action. And then the last step is actually very important for organizational learning and memory. There's a lot made about that. And actually, a lot of organizations are investing in people with library sciences degrees to help them get this right, because archiving those efforts and preserving that knowledge from a project or initiative is really critical. And then, so the benefits that it provides is just-in-time involvement of experts, fast generation of alternatives, and constant communication among those experts. Some examples that you see in the middle, this would be very applicable to like an emergency response team. It can be very applicable to a sales team in a win-loss scenario, security breaches, incident response. And so these teams can either be static or they can also be ad hoc. In most like emergency response management scenarios, these are very ad hoc teams from multiple agencies that are coming together. So often they don't have these technology features on the right that they need. They don't have federation. They're not on the same types of platforms. But what you see in this right-hand bottom quadrant is what an optimized technology feature set that's OEM agnostic. It doesn't matter. As long as a triage group has those technology features, then they're optimized to communicate and collaborate with each other in a way that, for an emergency response team, right, might mean the difference between people's being alive. So some closing thoughts. I would ask you to think about your company and where you work now, and think about your collaboration maturity. Are you still emailing around spreadsheets and documents? Are you still sending out requests for help to find information or expertise? How often does that happen in your organization? And then, how can you mature that in your corporate culture? And then a big part of, organizational learning and retention, as I mentioned, is when my human assets walk out the door, whether through attrition or other circumstances, what is, how viable is my ability to, effectively access and utilize our knowledge management repositories so that I retain as much of that learning and organizational knowledge as possible. And then my last thing, I would say, how much productivity and time? That's the question that I've yet to get an answer to, that, we think that we have some thought leadership around helping folks understand that impact. And so do we have a hodgepodge of technology, or do we have a real collaboration strategy that allows us to execute with purpose? So I would say be a sharer, not a hoarder. I personally love to watch the show Hoarders. I think it's hilarious and disturbing at the same time. But who doesn't, like a picture of a little boy giving a little girl flowers, right? So lead by example, set the bar high, know and understand your patterns and what the technology requirements are to enable them and optimize them. And then adopt a selfless philosophy that is, a we more than me philosophy, and that when we grow, I grow. Thank you.